My name is Dr Simon McNair. I am a Leverhulme Early Career Research Fellow based at the Centre for Decision Research here at Leeds University Business School. I am an economic psychologist, so I'm interested in understanding how people's thoughts and actions and feelings can influence the kinds of financial decisions that they make. And I study this in relation to various aspects of financial decision making, including debt and financial distress, and also in relation to more everyday consumer financial decision making, such as how people make spending decisions or borrowing decisions. So I'm currently involved in a 3-year Leverhulme Early Career Research Fellowship, and in this project I'm working in partnership with the Citizens Advice here in Leeds and also in Bradford. I'm working with their debt advice team specifically. Citizens Advice is the largest independent provider of debt advice in the UK, and debt is the second most frequent issue that they deal with amongst their clients. The aim of this project is to develop an advice resource that can be given to their incoming debt advice clients that gives targeted advice and support that pertains directly to the kinds of emotional and psychological barriers that often accompany being in debt. We're now in the final year of this project, and indeed we're in the final phase of the project. But over the previous 2 years and the previous phases of this project, we have conducted a series of in-depth interviews, both with debt advice clients and also with debt advisors. And the aim of those interviews was to learn about the key emotional kind of concerns that debt advice clients had about their financial situation, or that they had about getting advice from Citizens Advice, for instance. We then followed that up in phase 2 of the project with a larger survey, which was a chance to give us an idea of the wider prevalence of the kind of salient emotional issues that debt advice clients often present with. And what we've done is taken all of that information, and in the third and final phases of this project, we've taken all of that information and we have developed and designed an advice brochure that targets specifically the most pernicious, pervasive, and the most salient emotional and psychological burdens that people often are facing with debt. Most prevalent was stress. So a lot of debt advice clients present with very high levels of stress about their situation, and people are stressed due to the financial constraints of their circumstances and what that might mean for them and for their family. People are also stressed about frequent letters and phone calls from creditors, and also from the prospect of bailiffs perhaps coming out to the family home. And people are also stressed about feeling like they don't have any control over the situation, and that has a really negative impact psychologically. And what we know about stress in relation to money issues is that it can really impinge upon people's ability to think clearly about a situation and to make rational decisions. And that's particularly problematic for incoming debt advice clients, because if they are very stressed, it may actually prohibit them from effectively taking on board and effectively applying the advice that they're getting from a Citizens Advice debt advisor. So another very prevalent experience that clients told us that they go through whenever they are experiencing debt is that they feel emotions such as shame and guilt and embarrassment. And these are what psychologists would call self-conscious emotions. Having debt is still quite a stigmatized thing in the UK, and many people feel that if other people were to know about their financial circumstances, that would lead to them being viewed negatively or being judged, for instance. And psychologically, it's very important to distinguish between these different kinds of self-conscious emotions because they lead to different kinds of responses. So for instance, somebody who feels ashamed about their situation may become very avoidant, and that can ultimately drag out a situation for longer and prolong all of the stress and all of the other misery that may accompany that situation. Whereas in contrast, somebody who feels guilty about a situation will act in quite an opposite way. So they will become quite approachable about their financial situation, in the sense that they may, for example, agree to a financial repayment plan with a creditor to make themselves feel like they have taken a positive step forward. However, that financial repayment plan might be unfeasible for them in terms of how much they can afford. A final very salient emotional barrier that people reported to us that they often experience is feeling a pernicious sense of wrongdoing or self-deprecation about their situation. Debt advice clients talk to us about feeling like they have done something wrong to end up in a situation where they owe money to people or to companies. And they also feel a strong sense of failure in themselves for needing advice or support about these circumstances. And what we know psychologically is that at their worst, these kinds of emotions can make people feel completely helpless about their situation, and that in turn can lead to situations where people feel like it's not worth even trying to take any positive steps forward at all. So the brochure that we've designed gives targeted advice to debt advice clients about the kinds of emotional burdens that we've just talked about. Stress, for example, can manifest in many different ways. It can be emotional, it can be physical, and it can also be behavioral. So our advice brochure helps clients to understand the different ways that stress can present, and also gives some advice about some exercises that people can do to try and alleviate stress in the heat of the moment. So with respect to self-deprecation and feelings of self-criticism, these often manifest in what psychologists call cognitive distortions, which are ways that our minds tend to overstate the negatives while simultaneously overlooking the positives. And it's important to combat that because in situations of financial distress, it's important to take stock of even minor victories. And so our advice brochure details some of the most common cognitive distortions and also contains some advice on some exercises that clients can do to remind themselves and to be more mindful of positive steps that they're taking, even if they're small steps, because it's important to keep those in mind. Elsewhere, the brochure helps people to distinguish between the various different self-conscious emotions that they might be experiencing in relation to their situation. And it's important to distinguish between them because there are different kinds of thoughts and actions that accompany feeling shame or feeling guilt or feeling embarrassment. And this can help people to identify, for instance, and recognize when these kinds of emotions might be ruling their decision making. So in the final phase of the project, which is currently ongoing, we have selected a random group of citizens advice, debt advice clients, both in Bradford and Leeds, to receive our advice brochure alongside the advice that they ordinarily would receive from a debt advisor. We're going to track those people over time, and then we're also going to track another group of clients who don't receive the brochure, and that allows us to compare both of these groups and track how their psychological well-being is over the course of the debt advice process. And that'll allow us to gain some insights as to whether our brochure has led to any more improvement in people's psychological well-being and whether it may be a good tool to use as part of the debt advice process.